Hi guys, it's Sophie. So I'm doing a niche video today, but I thought this could be fun. I haven't filmed a big pile of book recommendations in a while. And today I wanted to talk you through some of my favourite medical, health, illness related non-fiction. Medical non-fiction is definitely a really big subgenre of the stuff I enjoy. I ransacked my shelves for these books and bits were looking a little bit empty by the time I finished. So some of these are really old favourites, some of these are newer books that I've read, but I thought it'd be fun to just do some recommendations in one place because I don't think I've done that with this type of book before. Okay, I've tried to split these books into some broad categories within the category, just to make it easier for myself to talk through them. So the first stack we have is what I would call books about the functioning of the human body. Two of these are by Siddhartha Mukherjee. The first is The Gene, which is an in-depth look about what we understand about the gene. This is a book I read a while ago and I still think about it a lot. It's almost like a mystery that you follow through about how genetics functions, how it impacts medicine today. And I think I've read everything that Siddhartha Mukherjee's written, but the two I'm going to recommend here are my favourite. I think the only other one he'd written, as far as I know, is quite a short pamphlet, but The Gene is all about genetics. Then my favourite of his is this, The Imperable Maladies. This is a book about cancer. This is describes as a biography of cancer. It's talking about our history with cancer, the way that we treat it, the way that we interact with it, and this particular subcategory of books is something I really enjoy, and I really ought to try and find more writers who write these kind of stories, write compellingly, but about anatomy or about disease in such a way that it is a story about the illness. I find them so compelling. So that is The Imperable Maladies. And then the last one is The Matter of the Heart by Thomas Morris. This looks at the heart as a physical organ, the history of the heart, the operations that have happened to the heart and who's helped develop them, the patients that have been affected, and has lots of colour imagery of different aspects about the heart. I really want more of this. I do wonder whether he's written more than I'm aware of. There's nothing in here, but I reckon I might look up both of these afterwards because I'm a little bit short on books. Then the next section I have is a little bit about women's health. So Unwell Women I read recently. This is a history of women's pain, how it is managed, how it's treated, and the ways in which sexism and medicine have fed in for as long as we have had sexism. The next is How the Pill Changes Everything. This book had a lot of information that I was not aware of as someone who's taken the pill for a very long time, and it's led to me, actually, I've agreed it today, agreeing to have a period without the pill so that I can see what my body might do without it. And I have a very supportive pharmacist who is very happy to also recommend that. But yes, this taught me a lot that I didn't know and I was surprised about. So definitely one on Women's Health pile. Then similarly to Unwell Women, we have Pain and Prejudice, which looks at the way that women again have been treated throughout history, but also looks at the more modern sort of health discriminations or disparities that exist for women in today's age. Then finally we have The Change by Germaine Grier, and this is looking at the experience of menopause. This is something I'd like to read another book on, as well as this one particularly. But the menopause is something for me, and accepting that I'm still a young woman, but something that is completely clouded in mystery beyond hot flushes, and this was my first kind of glimpse into what that world might look like. So that's my little collection on women's health. I do want to say at this point, this is definitely not all the books I own. I just wanted to choose my favourites from several categories so we could have a bit of a chat. The next two I have is something that just fascinates me and has done since I was quite young, and that is conversion disorders and fictional illnesses. And when I say fictional illnesses, I want to caveat it by saying that I think if someone truly believes they're ill, they are ill in some way, whether that is a physical illness or whether that is something that their brain is interpreting as wrong, but it's linked to how they're feeling in themselves. But I find that a really fascinating distinction in that overlap between mental and physical health, and it's just something that has interested me for a long time. The first of which is It's All in Your Head. This book, despite the title, is I think very empathetic towards people who have any kind of conversion disorders, who have any kind of illness where there's not a physical root cause that can be identified, but there clearly is symptoms, and it takes the the kind of approach of wanting to treat that person and to make them get better regardless of what that looks like. But I found this one really interesting. I think I've got another one of hers in here somewhere. But it's told in the form of patient stories. And then the next one is on a slightly different kind of topic. So this is Dying to Be Ill by Mark D. Feldman and Gregory P. Yates. And this is looking specifically at Munchausen's disorder. So that is a recognised mental health disorder wherein the patient knows that they're not physically ill but is undertaking activities to present their lab results or their presentation as someone who is physically unwell. So this is a mental health disorder that often on the face looks as though someone is physically unwell. And yeah, as I said, I'm fascinated with kind of the links between mental health and physical health for quite a long time, so those two are quite interesting. Then I've got a few what I would call like personal narratives around chronic illness, disability, being unwell, and these are mostly new ones. I do have a few others, but I haven't enjoyed them as much as the ones I've read more recently. The first is Sanatorium by Abby Palmer, and I adored this. I said how much I adored this. It's about a woman who is coping with the kind of chronic pain that's within her life and the way that she needs to manage herself and her body as that changes and her relationship to body and self. It was brilliant. Disability Visibility is a collection that looks at, I think it's 21? No. From the 21st century. It looks at a number of essays from different people within the disabled community talking about their disability, how it relates to them as a person, how they interact with it, but it's not just like, this is my disability and this is how it impacts me. It's these like tiny snippets into people's lives living with disability that feel really important to hold on to, and I really enjoyed that one. The next one I have is a book by Sarah Manguso. I really like her as an author, and I just think the way she writes is really staccato and clean. But this is Kinds of Decay. This looks at her experience with being diagnosed with, I think, a fairly rare autoimmune condition, and again her relationship with body and self and sort of going through this process of becoming someone who was unwell. It's been a while since I've read this one. I think I read it fairly soon after it came out. No, it must have been a little bit later. I think maybe I read this in 2010, but I remember really liking it, but I really like her anyway. The next is Gargoyles by Harriet Mercer, which follows a woman who had previously been very well and had an acute health crisis, and we look at, again, her within this crisis, the way that she's managed by the systems that she's in, and how her body becomes something that feels quite foreign to her at times. She's in and out of ICU, she's very acutely unwell. So whereas some of these have more chronic illnesses that have periods of acute unwellness, this is someone who kind of very suddenly fell into this acute illness and then had to live with the consequences of that. So that's Gargoyles. The last one I have is something slightly different, but it feels very personal, so that's why it's here. And it might fit in a bigger collection of things that I haven't explored yet, so just to note that. But this is Care Work by Leah Likshima Pepiata Samarasina, or Sinha, Samarasina. This is a look at the model that we use when we talk about disability, and looks at the social model of disability, but specifically about the ways in which we accept or receive or transact care for people who need care for more than a short period. This is a very intersectional piece of writing. It's looking at disability in the context of sort of, how does she describe it? In the context of like queerness, and also in respect of race. So it's multifaceted, the kind of arguments that they're having. They're saying that the experience you would have not being a queer person and being disabled is different yet again from one that you would have from being a queer person who is disabled and is also black or brown. This one is something I feel like there must be more there that surrounds this piece, because it felt as though some of these ideas are so well developed and I'm not accessing them yet. So I'll look forward to finding out what else sits with this book, but for now I've put it with my kind of more personal narrative. Then I have a little collection that relates to personal stories about mental health, split them out for numbers. The first of which is Inferno, which I loved. This is a book which looks at the experience of postnatal psychosis, which is something I've never read about before. Whenever I've been in hospital, I've never met anyone with postnatal psychosis, and I know I've wax lyrical about this one already, but it really is bloody brilliant. And the next one belongs with the physical books, but I want to put it here. It's Brain on Fire by Susanna Cohen. You might have seen the Netflix show, I think it's a Netflix movie they made of this one. The reason why I put this with mental illness rather than with physical illness is because the way she was presenting when she was very unwell was as though she had a mental illness. And I think that the kind of the journey through this book is seeing what would happen if you had a mental illness. And whilst I really enjoyed this book, there is a little bit of a rescue narrative of because she's not psychotic, she feels kind of saved in some way. So that's why I think that one's interesting to put with mental illness, because even though she was acutely unwell, there was some relief for not being mentally unwell. So that is Brain on Fire. I do think it's a really good book. It's a little bit of a like medical thriller in a way, even though it's a true story, it reads very pacily. Then another one which also looks at psychosis. I have more books on other aspects of mental illness too, but maybe I feel like I've spoken about them too much. But this is The Collected Schizophrenias by Esme Wang, and I love this. I think that it can be complicated sometimes when people are more severely unwell with schizophrenia symptoms to express what that experience is like, and I'm in awe of Esme's ability to bring that onto the page and in a way that is so accessible and understandable for people. And I think, you know, psychosis is one of those just scary words that people can distance themselves from, and if you haven't read this one, please do. I know it's quite often one that gets put on lists and things, but I do think it's fairly essential reading. It's something that I really encouraged Tom to read before he started working on the ward he works on now. Yeah, and she's just a lovely bubbly person on Twitter and things as well. And then the last one I have is a bit of a compilation. That's When People Started to Worry by Nancy Tucker, and this looks at a number of different people. How many are there? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 7 young women who experience different aspects of mental ill health, and they each are opening a window into their minds as to what that might feel like. I did find this fairly challenging to read. It's very raw. It feels almost like you're looking into their therapy sessions, but I think if you wanted a more overview rather than a deep dive, which some of those other ones were, That's When People Started to Worry is probably quite a good starting point. Then the next selection of things I have is books written by healthcare professionals. So the first one I have is The Heartland, Finding and Losing Schizophrenia by Nathan Filer. He is no longer working as a psychiatric nurse, I believe, but this was written about his time working with people within the mental health system. I don't know whether, I think he was on just an adult acute ward, just as into psychiatric wards. But yeah, so this is looking at his experience of working with patients. It's a slightly different view, obviously, than the actual experiences of the people, but I also quite like reading from the perspective of healthcare providers too, about their life and their experiences. The next one is gorgeous. I love this book so much. It's When Breath Becomes Air by Paul Calafini, and this looks at a doctor who becomes a patient, and it is heartbreaking and gorgeous. I have a review of this book up on my channel, and for some reason it's one of those videos that ends up really high up in the views. So if you want to hear me talk about this more, I do have a video on this. Just search, I think if you just search When Breath Becomes Air, you'll probably find it on YouTube. But this is just such a heart-wrenching tale, story, journey thing. It is just one of those books that stays in your head for a really long time. I'm probably not being too coherent, and it's been like 3 years since I've read it, so it is really good. And then I have 2 other books which are by the same author, they're by Atul Gawande. The first one is Complications. This is, Atul Gawande is a surgeon, but this is looking at when medicine goes wrong, when things break, why things break, and what the implications are for the patient, and talking about quality of care. The next one, which is called Better, is quite similar. It's looking at that kind of quality improvement of what medicine is, and asking ourselves kind of in retrospect, where has medicine fallen down and where is it not delivering. These are quite different to the other 2 I've recommended from clinicians' perspectives, and they're probably ones I would feel like medicine students might read more of, but yes, I've enjoyed both of them. I think he's got one more. He's got Being Mortal, which I haven't read. I think that's the one everyone has read, so maybe I should pick that up at some point. Okay, then probably the books I have left, because there's a lot. These are all like in one camp, apart from probably the next one, which stands on its own slightly. So this one is No Visible Bruises. You probably can't see that very well because it's such a bright cover, by Rachel Louise Snyder, and this looks at domestic violence and how it links to other violence within our cultures. And I've included this here because for me domestic violence is fundamentally a health concern. I think that the ability to prevent and protect people from violence in their homes is something that the government should be responsible for as well as individuals. And I really enjoyed this book. It is a topic that I feel like I haven't seen a lot about. It's quite a hard thing to talk about, and quite hard too to kind of sit and read about domestic violence, sort of in big periods. But if you are interested in this one, I really did enjoy it. I think that the ways in which she's looking at domestic violence as a signifier of our kind of social position and the wider issues around violence and sexism and etc., that it's a symptom, and yeah, I really enjoyed this one too. So the rest of the books are probably like my favourite category, I would say, in terms of like, if you were trying to advertise them to me, it's like a little bit catnip. And these are kind of medical mysteries, exposés, pulling the carpet out from it. I love books like this. The first one I have that I think about all the time is The Man Who Closed the Asylums by John Foote. This looks at a man called Franco Basaglia, who was a psychiatrist who altered the model of asylum in Italy and essentially broke that cycle of treatment for mental illness of just confinement. I think about this all the time in terms of today's impacts. I talk about this book all the time, and it is quite textbooky, but it had, as someone who's been inpatient in mental health wards, it had such an impact on me that I can't not keep thinking about the work that was described within this book. If you are interested in kind of the history of madness, the history of asylum, I would definitely recommend this one. The next one I have, I could have probably put in our first category, that Anatomy of a Disease type of book. It's How to Survive a Plague, but for me this belongs outside of that because this is more personal maybe than some of the other books that are in this camp, in that there's so much to the story of AIDS. This is what this is about, HIV. Sorry, I'm not comfy, let me shuffle myself. Yeah, in that this is, in the story of AIDS in so many ways is such a personal story as well as a collective story, and whereas things like The Matter of the Heart, you can speak quite dispassionately about heart operations without necessarily needing to see the emotion that's in that patient, though I do also think from memory there was some description of patient experience, whereas How to Survive a Plague is fairly reliant on us understanding the impact that the disease had on real people. So that's why that one belongs in this side. The next one I have is The Great Pretender by Susanna Cohen. There you go, there's the second book by her. This is a book which looks into the history, the truth behind a study which took place wherein, I think it was 7, was it 7? Yes, 8. David Rosenhan and 7 other people who were completely psychologically healthy sought to be admitted to psychiatric institutions to see whether they would be let out. And the experiment showed that people were far more keen to put them in than to ever let them out again. It's an experiment that I've been interested in for a long time. And whilst I don't think this book is perfect, it's the only one that I've read that looks at that in the kind of detail that I was looking for. The next one I have is Bad Blood by John Carreyrou. I think lots of people have read this one, but this looks at, I think it's called Theranos. The company which said that it could run blood tests with a single drop of blood from your fingers. This is Silicon Valley, greed, mixed into the world of medicine and people's lives, and I love it being broken down and uncovered. I don't love that it happens, but I love reading into the work that goes into why this won't work and the people who are like tirelessly reporting on this medical malpractice. So that is Bad Blood. And then I have 2 books on, again, kind of the dark sides of medicine, which are by Harriet A. Washington. The first of which is Medical Apartheid, which looks at the horrendous ways in which medicine has used black bodies for experimentation, for torture, for surgery practice. This book, despite, okay, this doesn't, I can tell you, like, right now, this book doesn't, like, look that appealing. I don't feel like the cover's that brilliant, and it feels like a lot of people would look over this book, but I really, really think this book is important and just horrendous, but such an important part of understanding the history of medicine that if that's something you're even vaguely interested in, please add this one to your TBR. The next book by Harriet A. Washington is A Terrible Thing to Waste, and this looks at the more modern implications of environmental damage and how that links to racism. So we're talking about not having clean water, not having clean air, where we dump toxic materials and the communities that affects. They pair very nicely together, those 2 books, and I would say if you've enjoyed either this one or Medical Apartheid, please do pick up the other. I think she's brilliant. I think she's probably one of my auto-buy authors, but I also think the knowledge of medical apartheid being in your head when you read A Terrible Thing to Waste lets you see this as part of a continuing practice of racism rather than viewing this as a problem in specific areas today. It's built into the history of how we think about health. Then we have just one book, though I'm pretty sure I have multiple, on mystery illnesses. This is The Sleeping Beauties by Susanna Sullivan. She wrote It's All in Your Head. She works with conversion disorders. And we follow in this collection a number of different illnesses from across the world which have either kind of not like dubious but like unknown origin or unknown pathology, and we look at kind of what that disease presents like, how it might be interpreted in other cultures, and the ways in which illness behaviour differs in cultural context. She's a really interesting writer. And I think you would get quite a lot from this. There's a few like illnesses or stories in here that Tom and I still like go back and forth with on each other because I kept telling him the stories as we were reading them. So this is kind of a little bit of a puzzle piece, but I think more than anything it's about cultural understanding of illness and medicine. The next book I have is Bad Faith by Paul A. Moffatt. This is yet another look at medicine and its lenses, but this is looking at religious practice and how that can get in the way of medical practice. We're not talking about like medicine should be God. We're talking about the ways in which certain religious groups can suggest practices which will lead to their members dying. I think we also talk about child abuse in this book. Yeah, we do. We'd also talk about child abuse and like religious extremism rather than just if you have a religion you're bad and you're breaking medicine. This one was one I picked up totally on a whim and hadn't heard nothing about, and I don't think about it as much as maybe I think about some of the other books that are on here, but I think I read it. Did I read it before BookTube? I think it might have been a close one. I think this might just have been pre-BookTube. But yes, this one is just looking at that interaction and about who is the expert there, particularly in cases where children are the people that are affected. If the parents' religious belief could end the life of their child, is that their decision to take, or should medicine intervene? Is that like a safeguarding issue? So that's another one, just one more left, but we have had a lot to chat through. The last one I have is Patient HM by Luke Diptrich, and this is looking at a very, very famous patient in neurology. He was a man who had an operation to remove, I think it was half of his temporal lobe, but they removed both. yeah, they did a dual operation in his brain where it had only ever been done on one side, and it fundamentally affected his ability to form memories and interact with the world in respect of memories. So we're looking at him as an individual, but also looking at the lessons that were learnt from this. It was an experiment, but I believe that he understood what was going to happen beforehand from memory. When did I read this book? 2016. Yeah, it's been a little while, but I believe he was epileptic, and I believe he was consenting to this. It wasn't done against his will, but because it had never been done before, they had no clue what to expect, and essentially it just broke this man to a continuing loop of memories. And I actually don't think it even stopped his epilepsy, but this is kind of that case history approach, and again that history of medicine through the eyes of one patient and learning what you can from the things that don't work, but also understanding the impact on that individual. So that's a lot of books. That is everything I wanted to talk to you guys about today. I just thought I haven't done one of these videos in a while where I choose a topic and we chat through them. Maybe there's a book in here that you're interested in. I am going to be on the hunt for some more books of this variety, so do let me know in the comments down below if you have any favourites. As I said, my immediate go-to is probably the kind of medical investigation area, but I am interested in all of them. I think the particular part I would like more recommendations on is anatomy or singular disease study, but told in a compelling way. I'll see you guys again soon in my next video, and look after yourselves until then.